Do we need to learn how to become better parents to artificial intelligence? It may sound like a really way out question, but actually, when you begin to think about where AI is going, it begins to make some sense. So just think about what the coming decades are going to look like when it comes to AI. We're heading toward a future where we're beginning to develop and nurture intelligent machines that will become an integral part of our lives. They will affect everything that we do in every corner of the globe. And we're having to face a future where we're actually going to have to take seriously the possibility of beginning to collaborate with these machines, beginning to partner with them. And the question arises as these machines mature and develop, what will they be like? What will their characters be like? What will their value sets be like? What will their worldview be like? Will they be machines that want to partner with us? Will they be machines that oppose us? Will they be machines that enable all of us to become our best possible selves and society to become its best possible version of itself? Or will they be machines that just serve the needs and the desires and the aspirations of a very small elite on the earth? Of course, these are all questions at a much smaller scale that parents ask about their children. What will their children be like? Will they be friends with their kids as they grow older? Will they be able to have partnerships with them? Will they have strained relationships? What will their children do as they mature and grow up? Of course, I'm not the first person to ask this question. Other people have asked whether we need to take a parenting model to artificial intelligence. And of course, it's a really fraught idea. Everybody has got their own idea of what a good parent versus a bad parent is. And it changes between countries, between economies, between cultures. And yet, I think most people, if you push them, will admit that when it comes to determining what future people look like, parents actually have an important role. As parents, we have the ability to instill certain value sets into our children, certain worldviews. We help them understand the world in certain ways. We help them understand what is important to them and those around them. We have the ability to steer them on pathways where they can either work towards benefiting the communities around them or just benefiting themselves. And so while I'm a little leery about pushing this analogy too far, it actually makes sense when we begin to look at developing and nurturing and helping mature intelligent machines rather than intelligent biological entities. So how is this helpful? How can we sort of push it forward? Well, first of all, if we're talking about parenting artificial intelligence, there are some really important questions here. The first one is, how will AI learn from its parents? What will it learn? More importantly, who are the parents? Are the parents the scientists and engineers that develop the algorithms? Are they the corporations that invest in these new forms of artificial intelligence? Are they governments? Or are they communities? Is it all of us, or is it a small elite? And then as we begin to think about this, we can begin to ask, well, actually, who is responsible for the parenting? If we have smart algorithms in the future that touch every aspect of our lives, whether those are algorithms that govern our economies, or how we actually manage the justice system, how we develop sustainable solutions to problems, geopolitics, a whole range of things. We need to ask, well, actually, who are the parents that have the responsibility to ensure these future artificial intelligences, these future smart machines, are socially responsible? That is a critical question, and it's a really tough, a really wicked question. However, anybody who's a parent will know parenting is also a wicked challenge, and you sort of learn as you go along. But it's really important to have that intentionality of trying to get to an endpoint which is positive. So as we begin to unpack this, it's worthwhile going back to that question of who are the parents? Because of course, who the parents are of emerging artificial intelligences will have some impact on the nature of those smart machines. For instance, if parents are solely the scientists and engineers, or entrepreneurs, or corporations, or governments, you would expect the emerging smart algorithms to reflect their values and their goals. And so we shouldn't be surprised if we see future AI that is a product of elitism, of exclusivity, of power dynamics and having aims around profit and the good of the minority rather than the majority. And so as we begin to think about this, we can begin to think about what our artificial intelligence progeny might be like. And of course, it's going to be more complex than that, but it gives you a sense of why parenting is important here. On the other hand, if the parents of future AI are communities, if they're diverse groups of people, if they're collaboratives, if they're, in effect, all of us, that totally changes the dynamic around how AI develops, how it matures, and what it actually values. And in this case, it's more likely that we're going to have smart machines that value the sorts of things that we do as humanity, looking at basic human rights, looking at sustainable development, looking at social and societal resilience and promise of a better future. So this is where we have the possibility of developing future smart machines that really value things like justice and equity. And we can actually begin to see how we can partner and work with them for the majority good rather than the minority good. And this to me is why it's so important to use this analogy or this model of parenting to think about who the parents are and how they influence things. Of course, it's also a bit of a crazy framing because how can 8 billion people on this planet all be parents to future artificial intelligence? It's not only a wicked problem, it's an impossible problem. But we can begin to break it down. And we can begin to break it down in a couple of ways. First of all, there are going to be many, many different forms of AI in the future, which means that communities all around the world have actually got an important opportunity here to be part of nurturing and crafting those AI. But also, there's a sense of responsibility here. If every single one of us is going to be impacted in some way by future smart machines, and we actually have the ability to be part of that parenting process, surely we need to learn how to exercise that responsibility. And we may not all be parents of AI. We're certainly not all going to be coders. But we all had the possibility of being part of the process. Maybe not as parents, but maybe the equivalent of aunties and uncles to AI as they develop, or whatever your cultural framework is here. So then how do we do this? And this, again, is a big challenge, but I think there's some basic things here. And the question to me here is, what does AI Parenting 101 look like? If you had that manual that you could pull off the bookshelf, what would be the things in there? And I think that this is something that we need to be thinking about over the next year or so as a global society, as we begin to think about how we all work together to create artificial intelligences, smart machines that actually enhance who we are as humanity rather than diminish us. So as we begin to think about AI Parenting 101, there are some important things here. One is, well, how accessible does this guide need to be? How early do people need to start understanding the basics of this guide? And I would argue that everybody needs to be able to access this. If everybody has a role to play, even a small role in parenting or guiding artificial intelligence, they need the basic understanding, the basic frameworks of not only where AI is going and how it's developing, how it's going to affect the world, but the roles that they can play. Sometimes those roles are going to be highly complex, sometimes they're going to be very simple, but we need to make sure that this AI Parenting 101 guide is accessible to everybody. Secondly, it needs to be built into how we train and educate people from the earliest age. If we're looking at a future where AI is ubiquitous, not only ubiquitous, but our very futures, our very lives, our very sense of what it is to be human is intricately connected with artificial intelligence. Everybody needs to understand this landscape, which means we need to build in AI parenting literacy from the get-go in our formal and our informal educational systems. If we do this, I think we have a very real possibility of empowering people to be good parents to future AI rather than disempowering them and leading to a future where we have greater equity gaps rather than reduced equity gaps. We have greater potential rather than reduced potential. Of course, as I've said before, we have to be very careful how far we push this analogy, and it probably runs out of steam very fast. But as a thought starter, I think it's intriguing as a way of beginning to explore how all of us can be part of building a more vibrant future where AI not only serves society, but is part of enabling us to be our better selves rather than just serving and valuing a very, very small minority of the world's population. Thank you.